This is part 2 of chapter 9, Lifespan Development video lecture. Hello everybody. So we are still working on lifespan development, and now we're going to actually start talking about a little bit about cognitive development. So now let's talk about Piaget. Jean Piaget, he came up with cognitive development theory, and he had what you see on the slide is three basic assumptions in regards to his theory, that being schemas, assimilation, and accommodation. So with assimilation and accommodation, these are the two major processes by which the schemas will be allowed to grow as well as change over time. In speaking about assimilation, this is the process of being able to absorb new information within one's existing schema. So, for example, infants might use their sucking schema not only to be able to suck on nipples on the breast, but also being able to suck on blankets as well as their fingers, their toes. Somebody mentioned toes in one of my classes. But yeah, that would be developing and using assimilation in regards to their current schema of sucking. When we're talking about accommodation, now we're talking about how it occurs when new information or stimuli really can't be assimilated, and then that new schemas actually develop, or rather the old schemas are changed to be able to better fit with that new information. So infants' first attempt to be able to eat solid food, for example, with a spoon, that would be what we would be utilizing accommodation. Okay, so just remember, it's with the schemas. Schemas is our basic parts of our intellect and our development of cognitive structures, as well as patterns that helps us to be able to organize our ideas and our experiences, and how they might differ and change. Assimilation is taking those schemas and applying new information to it to build upon it. And then accommodation is taking existing schemas, or being able to make new ones fit within that new schema. So now let's start looking at some of these stages that Piaget spoke about. There are 4 stages, and within those stages, they actually can break down into a little further. But let me break those down for you at this point. The first one is going to be talking about sensory motor stage. Now, during this stage, this is what lasts from birth until a child or an infant start having some significant language acquisition. That, and that's usually around 2 years old, 18 months to 2 years old. At this point, children will start to explore the world. They're going to start developing their schemas, more or less primarily through their senses as well as their motor activities. So the term sensory motor comes from that fact that they start learning to touch, feel, move, all right? And then one important concept that we have to consider is that infants will acquire this during the sensory motor stage would be object permanence, okay? Understanding what that object is and that it relates to them and how it relate to them. So when we start talking about pre-operational stage, it's going to be during the pre-operational stage, which is roughly from age 2 through age 7, that the language will start developing significantly, is where the child begins to be able to think symbolically, being able to utilize symbols, use words, be able to represent different concepts. There are going to be 3 other qualities that will characterize problems as well as limits during this stage. The first one will be the lack of operations. And in Piaget, he labeled this period as pre-operational simply because the child will lack these type of operations. Speaking of like reversible mental processes. So, for instance, if a pre-operational boy has a brother, and he said, and you ask him, well, do you have a brother? He'll say yes. However, when you ask, does your brother have a brother? He'll probably say no. Um, And pretty much to be able to understand that his brother has a brother, he kind of first have to be able to reverse the concept of what is having a brother in the first place. So he knows he has a brother, but he's not realizing uh, that his brother has a brother, which would be him. Okay. Now the second part of it would be egocentrism. Children at this stage, they're going to have difficulty being able to understand that there are points of view that's other than their own, which would be that egocentrism. So a preschooler may move in front of you to get a better view of the TV, or they repeatedly may start asking you questions while you're talking on the telephone. Pretty much, this is demonstrating egocentrism. Children at this age, they're going to assume that others see, hear, feel, think exactly as they do. You're supposed to be on with them, okay? Uh, so that egocentric pre-operational child, they'll fail to see or understand that a phone caller cannot see their head nodding, um, or see what they're seeing on the TV if they're talking on the phone at the same time they're watching TV. It's cute, but pre-operational egocentrism can also lead children to those, having bad thoughts caused by a sibling or a parent that may get sick, or they may start misbehaving because their parents have problems within the family dynamics. Simply because their world centers around them, they often not going to be able to separate reality from what goes on inside their own heads. So that's egocentrism. Now, in speaking about this third component, anonism, is when a child is going to be believing in objects such as like the sun or the trees and clouds, or they might take a bar of soap, think that has motives, feelings, and intentions. Uh, like they might say the clouds are angry because they're dark, or the soap is sick because it's sinking to the bottom of the bathtub, or they think the soap might be tired. So animism basically is referring to that belief that all things are living or animated, okay, which we know it's not, but they'll feel that way. So we went over pre-operational already. I know the slides I kind of went ahead of myself, but this would help you with the pre-operational stage. And again, those ages are from 2 to 7, okay? um, and just remember there are those limits. Not able to be able to perform with their operations because of the reversibility situations, the egocentrism and animistic thinking. They are going to be starting to learn how to communicate symbolically, and at this stage, they'll believe that things like the moon or the sun would follow them. Now, the concrete stage, here, this is going to be between ages 7 to 11. Okay? This is during the time when there's a problem with being able to think abstractly. They're still going to be quite literal. Um, it's going to be where they'll be able to relate more to more tangible items such as blocks or toys or so forth. But thinking outside the box or thinking more abstractly is still out of their reach. They're able to understand conversations, and start beginning to understand that there's changes within a shape or appearance, and they'll start developing and demonstrating reversibility. So if you ask that question about, do you have a brother? He'll say yes. And then if you say, well, do your brother have a brother? And he'll be able to say, yes, I'm his brother. Okay. Um, but symbols and words and things like that, there's still going to be slight development and issues with trying to develop those particular situations. All right, is there any other notes I want to say to you? No. So let me move on. All right, now formal operations. This is when we're going to get to the point in life in which adolescence, starting around age 11 and to adulthood, formal operations begin. Now, at this stage, egocentrism is going to be more related to the problems of the life and those different situations. And during adolescence, we talked about how personal fables, where it's all about that person still. There's still that sense of, well, life is about me, and there's, it's got to be about what I want and what I want to do. And no, I'm not going to really worry about what you want or what you want to do. So although they are starting to formulate abstract thinking, it's still kind of timid initially. The more experience they have and start connecting with others, the more the realization is it's not all about them, but that there's others in the world that has to be considered. Uh, they'll start to be able to hypothesize as well as conceptualize. Okay, and at this time in life, that's when they'll start looking more about who they are. They'll start thinking about who they want to be, as well as start looking at their physical appearances. Now, as influential as Piaget's account of the cognitive development has been, there are others who have important theories as well as criticisms of Piaget's work. So one of those would be a Russian psychologist. His name is Lev Vygotsky. And Vygotsky kind of emphasized that, there's some things more than just the cognitive development that we have to consider. We have to also look at the social, cultural influences that's on a child's cognitive development. So rather than looking at internal schemas like Piaget does, Vygotsky felt that children really construct knowledge through their culture, through their language development, as well as collaborative social interactions with their parents or with more experienced thinkers. Okay, so unlike Piaget, Vygotsky believed that adults would play an important role as an instructor for development of a child, and that this instruction is going to be particularly more helpful when it falls within a child's zone of proximal development. And I need y'all to memorize that term, zone of proximal development. Okay, there is where he feels that it's going to be the most important for child development if they are interacting with those more experienced thinkers. So for example, our language development. The child starts out with babbling. The parent teaches the child the difference from babbling into speaking clear words such as mom, dad, no, yes, and so on. So that's that zone of proximal development that Vygotsky was talking about. So having briefly discussed Vygotsky's alternative theory, I'd like for you to take into consideration two major criticisms that's of the theory. So with Piaget, there's an underestimated abilities as well as underestimated genetic and cultural influences. Okay, research has been able to show that Piaget may have underestimated young children's cognitive development. For example, there's been an investigation that very young infants have a basic concept of how objects move, where the objects continue to exist, even when when it's screened from view, and they're able to also recognize speech sounds. Now, Piaget's model, like other stage theories, also has been criticized for not sufficiently being able to take into account those genetic and cultural differences. So, of course, if we were in class, this probably be something that we would be working on. But you can pause the slide and take a look at it and think about it for yourself. Um, Take this little quiz for yourself, okay? And think about your answers. And if there's any doubts or worries of not knowing what we discussed so far, go to that textbook and review. So take a moment, pause, look it up, read it. Make sure you know these, because of course these will have questions that's going to be showing up on that exam. So check your knowledge about cognitive development. All right, so pretty much this is going to take care of chapter 9. I will be going on and moving on to chapter 10, and that'll be uploading as a video as well. I am hoping, because to sit here and do this lecture, unfortunately, I am still struggling, and I do apologize for our missing classes with one another. I do hope we're going to meet Thursday afternoon. But I'm not 100% sure. It is quite painful right now for me to be sitting up like this, so I'm not sure. We'll see. But of course, if it's where I cannot make it, excuse me, if I cannot make it, of course, I will make an announcement prior to 1 o'clock. Again, my apologies, and I'll continue chapter 10 uh, in the next video.